Welcome back, my friend, to Nourished and Free, the podcast. This is the show for understanding your relationship with food, the nuances of health and wellness that can get so complicated and so confusing. And hopefully we can help you with gaining some more confidence in the body that you live in today as well. My name is Michelle Yates. I'm a registered dietitian with my master's in health psychology, and I love discussing how the world of psychology and biology and nutrition and all of that intersect and how we can better leverage that mysterious mind-body connection into increasing both our quality of health and also quality of life. Today, we're actually going to be digging deeper into the side of biology, specifically cancer biology. I'm insanely excited about today's episode because I'm having my friend on who is the cancer daddy of the internet, Dr. Joe Zundell. He is a cancer biologist with over 10 years of experience in cell and molecular biology techniques with a research focus in discovering translational therapies in oncology. We're going to talk through some common myths, such as the notion that sugar feeds cancer cells, or that sugar causes cancer, or that red meat increases our risk for cancer, and we'll dig into some others as well. Before we dig in, let's quickly talk about overeating. If you're someone who struggles with overeating and you're certain there's a reason why, but you can't really, for the life of you, pinpoint what it is, be sure you check out my free quiz that will help you discover what's going on in 2 minutes or less. Then you can figure out what the next steps are that you need to take in order to ultimately overcome that struggle. Go to yatesnutrition.com/quiz or the link in the show notes to take the quiz. Once you're done with that, come back and listen to this episode about all things cancer and nutrition with our guest today, Dr. Zundell. Welcome to the show, Joe. I'm so happy to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. Honor to be here.
You are my favorite resource for all things cancer now. I just found you like a couple of months ago, I think. And I was initially, I should say, attracted to your page because of all the cats on it. I'll be honest.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Your graphics are hilarious. I love that you take such a complicated topic and you make it actually fun to like swipe through because of all the different little graphics of cats that you have on there.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. A lot of people have invented the slogan on my page that is, come for the cats, stay for the facts.
Yeah, that's good.
But yeah, I initially, like you said, I started integrating cats into my work just because not only do I love them, but it's kind of like, the reason that attracted you. It keeps people in tune.
Yeah.
As you're teaching people complex things, it's kind of nice to have a break with some cute picture or something like that. And I find that obviously cats are really damn adorable. So having like a cute cat graphic in the middle of a 10 slide carousel is going to help keep someone engaged in a way that they're, going to learn something more.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Do you ever do classes? Do you ever lecture for courses? Because that would be amazing.
I have taught before. I've taught mostly labs, basic biology labs, but I haven't taught direct lectures. But I've given a variety of different presentations at conferences and things like that.
Do you work in the cats into those slides?
I have worked in memes and various things. Like a good example of this is actually in my thesis lab. I started doing that, and my PI actually got really mad at me for doing that. And he's like, "Can you just knock it off?" He said that in the middle of the lab meeting. He's like, "Can you just knock it off? Don't do this." I was like, "Come on, man! Like, why can't we have fun and have cute stuff or funny things and the science? They don't have to be mutually exclusive."
I absolutely agree.
But that's why I started my Instagram too, because I think that it's a really important thing to also have fun with what we do, because you don't want to just have. I mean, cancer's already challenging to talk about on its own, but it's hard to do if we can't make fun out of it.
Yeah.
It's a really drab topic and can often be very depressing, even from my own perspective. But we got to make it fun where we can.
Yeah.
Well, I know you agree.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, I'm so glad that you were able to take the time today, and I'm so appreciative of that. I know you have a full-time job, you have family, all the things, all the cats that you care for as well.
Yeah, my 2 fat fucking cats.
But I wanted to have this conversation because my mission with this podcast is I want to help individuals become more nourished and free. It's the name of the podcast. And however you interpret that little catchphrase is truly up to the individual and what they personally feel like they need to be freed from, what kind of struggles they need to be freed from. And I think for many people, a lot of times that struggle is food anxiety, or feeling like they're almost like imprisoned to having to scour the ingredients label, or worry and worry and worry over what they're eating because of potential cancer risk. So for someone in that state, my hope is that this episode today, maybe depending on how the conversation goes, I don't know, you're the expert, so we'll hear what you have to say. My hope is that perhaps this can help them with having a better understanding of how their food and their relationship with food and what they eat on a daily basis may or may not be impacting their cancer risk in the way that they may be thinking, you know? So I'm hoping somebody
Sure.
can walk away from this a little bit more nourished and
Yeah,
free.
I mean, a really big part of my page is to try and do what you're saying here, is try and simplify things such that people can walk away with actionable things and realistic things that they can implement into their lives,
Yeah.
such that they can be nourished and free.
Yeah. I
Um,
love it.
a lot from the idiocy of society as well, too. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, that's the thing.
yeah,
There's a lot of very loud opinions about cancer and food, and it's exhausting trying to keep up with all of it and trying to dispel all of it. And I think hopefully out of this episode we can give people a better like baseline understanding, so that then when they see something or they see a claim, they can kind of sort through the legitimacy of that on their own, maybe, or at the
mhm,
very least be able to refer back to this episode. So to
yeah,
start our conversation off, I imagine it would be very useful to first understand the basics so that we can
mhm.
kind of build from there of cancer. So can you kind of fill us in from your cancer biologist perspective, keeping in mind most people listening to this are not cancer biologists?
Most people aren't. I understand.
Can you kind of walk us through, what is it? How does it begin? What does it require in order to
Sure.
survive and grow and spread?
Yeah, it is a very complex argument because there is some debate on, I guess, the origins of cancer. But
Mm-hmm.
usually, when I try and explain as basic as I possibly can about what specifically cancer is, and it shouldn't really be a surprise to anybody, cancer itself is this disease which is characterized by cells that can continue growing past what is considered normal. Because obviously, that's what makes a cancer. That's what makes up a tumor, or some semblance of some types of cancers. So, again, it's characterized by consistent cell growth that often goes unchecked, because we do have a lot of safeguards and checkpoints within our cells that keep normal cells growing in a safe manner for, obviously the integrity of our overall bodies. And cancers happen when um, cells can bypass these checkpoints through a variety of different ways, not even just a genetic level from DNA checkpoints, a variety of different ways to bypass these normal limits to cell division.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I try and teach people about these limits of cell division, it's important to understand that there's a limit to how many times a cell can divide. So that's the basics of what is cancer, and it can get a little bit more complicated beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard it explained like that. So something dividing beyond the point of what's normal,
Mhm.
at what point is that dangerous? Why is cancer dangerous?
Yeah, so cancer becomes dangerous because it's kind of an adaptive disease. There's both metabolic and genetic components. But when cancer cells adapt new behaviors to divide past what's considered normal,
Mm-hmm.
they do it imperfectly. And these imperfections can cause a lot of really bad effects that we see often in cancer patients. Whether it's something like muscle wasting, severe dysregulation, or poor communication between organs because you have cancer cells that are competing for nutrients and resources to sustain their own growth, that kind of they're almost being like parasitic in a way. They're
Yeah.
not a parasite. I want to emphasize they're not a parasite, but they can be parasitic in the way that they steal resources like glucose,
Mm-hmm.
lipids, amino acids from our immune cells that are within the environment around a tumor, or even just normal like types of cells that are surrounding a tumor. So
Mm.
it's this level of competition that creates some of the bad stuff that comes with the diseases,
Yeah.
as especially as cancer progresses. And it depends on which organ the tumor originates in, the types of symptoms that you'll see.
Sure. So something that you just mentioned there is kind of, I think, already answering a question that I had for you, which is this idea that cancer feeds off of sugar, but you even just said it'll use glucose, lipids, like anything, right, to continue to grow and spread. Talk
Yeah,
to that more.
sure. Yeah. So there's also this notion that for the life of me, I can't seem to get rid of this myth that sugar causes cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And even if anyone says that sugar fuels cancer, it's kind of like for me, like a so what sort of thing,
Mm,
because it's something that I tell people is a means to an end.
yeah.
And people love to utilize early discoveries from a man named Otto Warburg back in the 1920s. He was absolutely brilliant at the time, and a lot of his initial observations regarding glucose
Mm-hmm.
absorption into cancer cells are still upheld today,
Mm,
which is why he was a Nobel laureate in this space. And it's still a hallmark of cancer in that cancer cells will utilize glucose almost as a primary fuel source. But I
sounds
say it's
like
a
our
means.
bodies in general.
Yeah, exactly. So, like a variety of different tissues, whether it's our heart, our brains, utilize a ton of glucose regularly as a primary source of their metabolic needs to maintain their energetics, their balance of energy.
Mm-hmm.
But cancer cells, because they're actively dividing and seemingly out of control of that norm that I had said based on the Hayflick limit that we established at the beginning, their demand for energy goes up, and so they utilize the same mechanisms that normal healthy cells do, but they increase the rate
Sure.
of absorption. So they do so by increasing the amount of glucose receptors on their surface of their cells. They pull in more glucose and they increase the abundance of the enzymes that break down glucose
Mm-hmm.
to increase the rate of glucose breakdown to fuel those energetic needs.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always go to produce um, ATP through the electron transport chain. So it's kind of counterproductive that we're learning that it's not through the traditional metabolic fates that we think of when we think of normal healthy cell biology. In normal healthy cells, they'll take in glucose. Glucose will be broken down through glycolysis, go into the citric acid cycle at a relatively normal rate, enter into the electron transport chain to make ATP, which is basically the energy of the cell. And a lot of this occurs at the interface and within the mitochondria. So a lot of
Powerhouse of the
people try
cell,
and,
baby.
yeah, exactly, powerhouse of the cell. So that's why a lot of people pinpoint cancer as like a metabolic disease, but it's quite a bit more than that. But we're finding now that um, the Warburg effect is still upheld in most cancer types. So they'll increase the rate of glucose absorption, but instead of the fate of glucose going through the citric acid cycle into the electron transport chain, it will do that. But cancer cells have found a way to use that glucose in other pathways
Hmm.
to stimulate the production of other energy sources, which might be more favorable to the growth of that cancer
Oh,
type.
interesting.
So it'll use glucose to either make more amino acids, or it'll use glucose to go into like the pentose phosphate pathway and shuttle that into making more nucleic acids to make more DNA so it can continue dividing.
Yeah, that's
Or it'll
interesting.
go into other pathways to make fatty acids, depending on where the tissue is, such that it might inhibit the immune system around the tumor, such that the tumor can continue growing if it's competing for fatty acids that the immune cells need also for their own survival and recognition of tumors. So it's more complicated than we initially observed back in the 1920s when Otto Warburg discovered these things, but it's so much more than glucose fueling cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like there's also multiple things that can fuel cancer, though, right? It's not exclusive to glucose or sugar.
No, it shouldn't be surprising to anybody that cancer cells can utilize all the same things that normal cells can.
Yeah.
It's just the rate and the way that they do it in a relatively dysregulated manner is very different than what normal cells use.
Yeah.
So they can
Yeah.
use all of the macromolecules that we normally use to be healthy, sugars, a variety of different types of sugars, different types of fats, whether they're saturated or desaturated,
Mm-hmm.
different types of amino acids. So literally all of these macromolecules of life that we learn about in basic cell biology, cancer cells can use these just as normal cells to fuel their biological processes.
Yeah.
And we have a hell of a time trying to target these pathways, and trying to delineate which cancers are using some of these nucleic acid integration pathways more than the glucose pathways or the amino acid pathways. And oftentimes it's some degree of all of them. And so we're trying to determine which ones are more important that we can, kind of tease apart and target from a clinical perspective, usually with pharmaceuticals.
Man, that's
And it's
fascinating.
it's really challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, that's like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah, that's literally what I tell people. I was literally just gonna say it's finding needles in a haystack of needles.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm thinking about, I don't have a ton of experience with oncology. I worked in an oncology unit in the hospital for a little while and a
Awesome.
little over a year. And for me, as a dietitian on that type of unit, my main priority there is diagnosing malnutrition, which I would see the most with my oncology patients,
Mhm.
and trying to correct it, trying to give them the fuel that they need to be stronger. And sometimes that was through tube feeds, TPN, depending on the situation where the cancer was and their abilities to eat and everything. So I'm like listening to you talking about how glucose, but also all these other things can fuel cancer at a rate different from our normal cells. But I'm also thinking too, like, where people can go with that is, oh, well, we should just well, obviously it's not an option, but we just shouldn't give it the glucose or give it the things to feed it. But on the other side of that, how else are we supposed to fight against it if we're not giving the normal cells the energy that they need as well? So I think there's and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this. I feel like there's this, you need to give your normal cells the fuel that they need to fight against the cancer, but in the same sense, that can also be going towards the cancer. And it's like, how do you separate that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, no, I mean, we're starting to investigate how nutritional guidelines can impact cancer patient survival more so nowadays, especially utilizing dietary approaches like ketogenic diets to try and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like ketogenic diet, reducing carbohydrate intake because of the importance of carbohydrates or glucose specifically in initially fueling cancer cell growth processes. But obviously, as we've discussed a little bit already, it's so much more than that. We find that these dietary approaches, they're insufficient alone
Yeah.
to be able to change cancer patient outcomes unless, maybe that cancer is detected in a relatively earlier stage. Because when you have a cancer that is more advanced and well developed, it can use more tools in the toolbox of cell biology, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
such that if you reduce glucose abundance, they're more capable of adapting new mechanisms or maybe already mechanisms that they already have.
Yeah.
Because often in the case of solid tumors, it's not just one type of cell. Depending on where a cell is within a tumor, you can have different metabolisms throughout a tumor.
Yeah.
It's kind of like in a liver,
Mm-hmm.
in a normal, healthy human liver, one part of the liver is metabolizing things differently than another part of a liver.
Mm-hmm.
In a tumor, you have different stratifications of different types of cells that are adapting to changes in oxygen gradients, changes in glucose gradients, changes in amino acid gradients. So,
Yeah.
if I starve it of something like glucose or even glutamine as an amino acid source,
Mm-hmm.
which we're finding is important in cancers,
Mm.
they'll adapt new mechanisms to shuttle in other resources or produce other resources through processes like gluconeogenesis. They'll
Yeah.
make their own glucose, or through upregulating enzymes in fatty acid synthesis, like steryl CoA desaturase 1, SCD1, which is a commonly upregulated fatty acid producing enzyme in cancers
Yeah.
to adapt to these changes in nutrients that we give it. So we have to be really careful about the nutritional guidelines. And you know this too, because you've worked with cancer patients. And not to keep rambling on here too, but it becomes even more complicated in advanced stages of
Yeah.
cancers because, one of the things that you've probably seen as well is cachexia. And I've
Oh, yeah.
spoken about this at length because most cancer patients in advanced stages. And I read a statistic on this, and I don't usually like using statistics because I feel like they're a bit inflated in general, but it is true in this case. 80% of most advanced cancer patients exhibit some form of cachexia. But when we look at the statistic related to all cancer patients total across all types, it's about 30%.
Do you want to define what cachexia is really quick for
Yeah,
anybody that
sorry.
doesn't know?
Cachexia is this state of muscle wasting,
Mm-hmm.
such that a person's overall metabolism is competing with cancer cells, basically, that now their body is starting to break down muscle tissue to try and sustain some semblance of life, basically,
Yeah.
because there's probably not enough glycogen storage in the muscle. There's probably not enough glycogen storage in the liver at that point. So typically in these really starved states, your body will start to break down muscle tissue. And this is what we see in cachexia patients, or muscle wasting.
Yeah. Yeah, it gets bad. Like I said, I
Yeah.
diagnosed a lot of malnutrition, and that was like you'd walk into a room and you'd see it right away. Like, yep, there is a lot of muscle that's been wasted in this. It's devastating, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think in this is kind of to what I was touching on earlier. It's so challenging to figure out, like, how do we handle this, because there's been muscle lost here that we want to try and maintain or even rebuild if possible. I mean, if they're at end of stage, they're probably not feeling up to strength training or anything, but
Yeah. A lot of it is about maintenance at that stage in terms
right.
of muscle
Yeah.
building, just trying to get some semblance of exercise in, right?
Something. Yeah. And to maintain life, as you said, and that can be so tough because it's like the same things that are used to maintain life in terms of nutrition can also be worsening the cancer. So it's so tricky. And I think that it's really important that people hear that and understand that. And I'm glad you've been explaining it, because to your point, nutrition alone isn't enough to get rid of cancer when it already exists. Like, we need more than that. And I think there's a lot of really dangerous stuff on the internet claiming that, eating a raw onion a day is going to cure cancer or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, I was just reading something. I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm not going to trash talk him any more than I already have, but are you familiar with Chris Work?
I don't think so, actually.
So this guy, his name is Chris Work. He has a page called Chris Beats Cancer, and he had stage 3
Wait, maybe I
colorectal.
do. Maybe
He
I
had
do know who
stage
this
3
is.
colorectal cancer that was surgically resected. It had metastasized locally, which, he had a relatively high chances of survival. But he did get surgical resection of his tumor, and he found that he was able to, through rejecting chemo, he was able to live a healthy life. And so now a big part of his platform, and I empathize with him, is, trying to implement behaviors associated with reducing cancer risks for his population of people that follow him. But the thing is he actively talks about how poor chemotherapeutics are,
Hmm.
with the intent. Maybe it's not his. No, at this point, I'm fairly certain it's his intent to dissuade people from chemotherapy.
Yeah.
I think it's important for people to realize that while one person's cancer may not need something like chemotherapy and it might have a high chance of survival rate after surgery, you can't make that same statement about another person's cancer type.
Yeah.
Not only that, like, even if two people had the same type of cancer, it's hard to say how someone's going to respond to surgery even then. Just
Yeah.
it's like a chance of success. So telling people not to get chemotherapy and trying to say that biopharmaceuticals are the devil is a really poor argument, and is actually going to lead to more poor health outcomes,
Yeah.
um, than I think what he's intending. But then, the thing is, he goes on to say, okay, chemotherapeutics are bad, but take this extract of some plant,
Yeah.
you know,
Classic.
and
Classic
which is,
grifter.
yeah, and it's really frustrating to me too, because as scientists, and I just made a post on this too, as scientists, we often start in nature
Yeah.
to get drugs. And this is this appeal to nature fallacy that I often talk about. We often start in nature to get drugs. For anybody listening, I want to squelch this right now. It is an absolute bitch to purify and make molecules from a natural product. For example, we get a lot of so some of our drugs in the clinic, they're derived from nature,
Hmm.
whether it's something like penicillin, but a lot of chemotherapeutics have been derived from like the bark of some specific trees. Paclitaxel being one of them, vincristine being another, camptothecin based molecules. But these things sucked initially, so we find them in extracts from tree bark, as an example, something like camptothecin, which is my recent post on this.
Hmm.
We extract this molecule from tree bark, and it has ridiculous toxicities because
Mm.
we don't know what it does. We don't know anything about the dosing. And when it comes down to it, after 10, 20 years of research on this molecule, we realize that there are certain modifications that need to be made on this molecule such that the dosing can be reduced, and also the toxicities can be reduced to
Sure.
off target non cancerous effects.
Yep.
So while something might be promising in an extract of a plant or some sort of natural product, we need to really determine what the thing is within that extract that yields the potential in treating cancer, and then also how we can make it better to reduce off target effects that are going to affect healthy cancer cells. And often it's this balance of sacrifice. Like it's really hard to make a molecule that just targets cancer cells. We're getting better at it now because we can conjugate these small molecules to more targeted molecules like antibodies, which you can bring that chemical directly to a cancer cell if you know some receptors that are upregulated on the cancer cell that are not on normal cells. But that's a really hard thing to find as well
Yeah.
because cancer cells often use the same things that normal cells do.
Right.
So it's hard to find these biomarkers
Yeah.
and yeah, it's tough.
Yeah. I mean, you could say what you just said about really any prescription drug. I think, that it requires figuring out what do we need in order to make this effective. And there's going to probably be some manipulation that happens, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And
Yeah,
it's probably a good thing, actually. And it's dangerous when we do have that appeal to nature fallacy where it's like, oh, well, this is naturally occurring in nature. Well, there's a lot of things that are naturally occurring in nature and can kill you.
yeah,
Like, does that mean that it's safer? Or yeah, it's a big misconception that I think is
yeah,
very easy to be attracted to. I mean, I find myself being like, oh, this is more natural. And then I'm like, wait, like I have to remember what I know.
yeah.
Because
I
it's
mean,
just,
people don't have any problems with, Ozempic, do they? Do you know
no.
where Ozempic comes from? You want
where,
me to tell you where Ozempic
where
comes
does it
from?
come from? Tell us, Joe.
It comes from the venom of the Gila monster.
What
So
is a
what are you
Gila
going to just
monster?
go look it up afterwards?
Okay.
It's some form of reptile. But yeah,
Okay.
so we initially discovered Ozempic from the venom of the Gila monster.
That is
But you
the
can't go
headline.
out there and consume the venom of the Gila monster.
Yeah.
Right. So
So
there's a variety of
interesting.
drugs that we initially looked to nature to find because
Yeah,
there's a lot of cool shit out there in some
absolutely.
pretty weird environments.
No
But we can't just
kidding.
go eat those things, right? So
Yeah.
it's to your point.
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back because you mentioned the ketogenic diet, and this is something that is very popular for weight loss, but also as a therapeutic intervention, specifically for children in epilepsy. I know is why it was created, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of research going on, as far as I know, about using it for all kinds of different conditions. So
Hmm.
I think what I'm understanding from you is that that could potentially, it's like kind of cutting off, so to speak, the glucose sources, which, our body can create glucose in other ways, but maybe that could slow down perhaps the cell division of cancer cells. Is that the theory there?
The running hypothesis there, and this is actually being determined in clinical trials now.
Beautiful.
And there's a lot of preclinical work going on examining dietary approaches in treating specific types of cancers, namely things like pancreatic cancers, where obviously glucose response is important in
Yeah.
driving insulin related signals, which can drive pancreatic tumor growth. So obviously, reducing something like glucose absorption to the tumor could help tumors like those,
Hmm.
or cancers like those. But the thing is, like I said, we're finding that they're not sufficient alone.
Yeah.
We can utilize these dietary approaches to change the metabolism acutely of cancer cells, and then once they change their metabolism, so let's say like I reduce glucose supply through a ketogenic diet in a cancer cell that is more predominantly using glucose than it is something like fat or protein or amino acids for its own energy. But in doing that, in cutting off the glucose, it will shift its metabolism to other metabolic sources, because it might start to use or increase the expression of enzymes associated with fatty acid synthesis or protein. I can then use a drug that targets some of those pathways
Hmm.
such that now it's not getting the glucose that it needed before. And now I'm targeting a different arm. So it's like you're
Yeah.
trying to corner the cancer cell in a metabolic direction. So it can't go in a different metabolic route.
Yeah.
You're cutting it off at the resources using like either a small molecule for a different pathway that's different from the typical glucose or glycolysis related pathways.
Yeah. So it sounds like
Does that make
there's,
sense?
oh, absolutely. So there's like a initial, sure, this can wipe out some growth in some way, but it's going to adapt. And then we can bring in some pharmaceuticals to target the adaptations that it's making in order to continue to grow without the glucose supply.
Yeah, or even change like the epigenetic component of the cells. So, in changing their metabolism when there's low availability of glucose, it'll enable the expression of genes that were not expressed before, um, and might actually have promoted resistance to a specific molecule. And now, because new genes are being expressed, the epigenome has changed in a different way. Now we can treat with the drug that we wanted to initially, and it will be sensitive to it. So
Interesting.
there's another component of that as well.
Wow. That is fascinating. I would
It is
love to hear
fascinating.
more. Let me know when those clinical trials come out because I would love to
Well,
know
there's
more
a
about
bunch
that.
of preclinical papers on it, but
Hmm.
yeah, I can
Send them my way,
make some
man.
more reels and talk to you later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That'd be great. That would be great.
Yeah.
So, something that you've talked about on your page, which I think is so important to communicate, is risk, relative risk. When we're talking about something may cause cancer, what are we saying the likelihood of that is? And that's usually, I think, what's left out of the conversation. And it needs to be left in is how much does this really impact your risk of getting cancer? And I think the way that we typically compute that type of information when we hear it, right, that like X is going to increase your risk for cancer is just, it's the way we compute it is very black and white. If I do this thing, I have a bigger chance of getting cancer. If I don't, I don't. And from what I've been seeing on your post, and I'd love for you to talk through, and just what we know from basic statistics is there's a degree of variance there. Something may barely raise your risk of cancer, but because there is somewhat of an increase, you still have to say it could increase your risk. So I'd love for you to speak to
Yeah.
that more and give me all your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's really important for people to understand one, I'm not a biostatistician, so there's only so much that I can realistically understand about how biostatistics are used to derive specific percentages of relative risk or even absolute risk.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important for people to realize that the statistical models that we use in papers before we publish them, are with the intent to try and understand an observation, and that just because we generate a number, as shocking as it might be, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate to everybody.
Right.
It might be a big number. For example, I recently made a reel about the risk between tattoos and cancer because there was this article that went out through a lot of secondary sources, not even the primary article, that people kind of lost their minds a little bit about the risks of tattoos and cancers. I have a tattoo, obviously,
Yeah. Anybody
but
watching on
these
YouTube can
things.
see.
Yeah, I've got a tattoo. Oh my god, I'm gonna get lymphoma. Anyways, this paper basically did its best to get all of the cancer patients that had relatively advanced stages of lymphoma in a Swedish population. But after a variety of different statistical analyses that were kind of poor, in my personal opinion,
Mhm.
they developed statistics upon their models to show that there was something like a 20% increase globally across all the lymphomas that they had tested, for people to have greater incidence, not even risk, incidence of lymphomas. So that's
Hmm.
like yes or no in terms of
Yeah.
I have lymphoma or I don't. So their
Right.
statistics said yes, there's a 20% incidence associated with people who have tattoos and cancers.
Yeah. That's pretty strong
And
language.
yeah, it's strong language, but like the paper was written so unclear
Hmm.
that I couldn't determine like if their control group that they were trying to compare the statistics to did or did not have cancer.
Mm,
It was really confusing.
yeah. Was it like, did
And
they
I made
follow
a
them over a long period of time, or was it like a,
no, it was based on a questionnaire. I think
oh,
honestly they had a relatively poor data set and they were doing the best they could. I don't
yeah.
blame the researchers, but there's some level of rigor that needs to go with this study that just wasn't there. They could have looked at other databases. There is some Swedish group, they could have looked outside of Sweden
Hmm.
at publicly available databases, or tried to extend the study beyond whatever time frame that they had to get more, maybe more realistic statistics associated with it. But like,
Sure.
people need to understand that that 20% stat that was generated from that article, sure, there might be some risk associated with people who have tattoos and lymphomas, but 20%, come on now. If that was the case, most tattooed people would have cancers across all populations,
Hmm.
and we don't see that.
Mm-mm.
Nonetheless, lymphomas, I would say that there'd probably be a greater risk of skin cancers
Hmm.
from different types of tattoos. But
Yeah.
again, it also depends on the types of inks, how professional the tattoo artist is, where they get their inks from, whether or not those inks contain carcinogens, if the tattoo artist is some tribesman out in Guam giving you a tattoo, or if it's some guy in a sterile environment giving you a needle that he opened freshly with some inks that are known not to contain carcinogens.
Yeah.
You know, Nowadays the availability of tattoos is more strict, in terms of sterile practice than what was obviously many years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So these
interesting.
statistics need to people need to understand that these stats that we generate in papers, they're useful in conveying an argument, but we need not to place so much strength in them that it
Hmm.
clouds our judgment.
Mm.
Understand the trends, but don't place so much power in the statistics.
Oof. That's the tweet right there. That's the tweet.
If I had a Twitter, maybe people would give a shit. I have a Twitter, but no one seems to give a crap about what I say there anyway,
Yeah,
so
but do you use
I don't use it.
threads? I don't know what to call it.
I
Like, that's the thread
Threads is
right
basically
there.
Insta Twitter, yeah.
Like, you tweet a tweet, but what do you do with a thread? Do you thread a needle? Is that what we're saying now when we post
I don't
on
know. We'll have to
thread?
ask. I mean, I don't know Adam Mosseri
I
personally,
don't
but we
either.
can certainly send him a message that I'm sure he'll never see.
We'll see if he'll get back to
Adam
us.
Mosseri, if you're listening to this, do you thread a needle when you write a thread? Maybe
That is
actually just make that a reel and tag me in it. I'll post it.
that is the most pressing question of today's episode.
Yeah.
So when somebody is talking about, let's have the example of red meat
Mhm.
increasing your risk for cancer. What is our relative risk there? I guess what's the baseball park? I don't know why I said baseball. The ballpark percentage of just fill me in on the whole red meat
Yeah.
thing. Let's go for it.
Yeah. Sure. The whole red meat thing. So I mean, I've tried my best to get actual statistics related to the dose relationship associated with red meat consumption and cancers, and it's, anytime you try and acquire human data, and
Mm.
there's actually a lot of human data on this that's in some pretty well done studies, a variety of different studies which compare things like vegetable intake to meat intake, and try and provide some sort of dose relationship there. But I can't, for the life of me, I can't get an accurate number just because that data is so variable. But I will say, like, the thing that I'm seeing across all of the literature and all the papers, and this is what I've made a reel on recently as well, is that, the people that their diets, they contain red meat, but they also have an abundant amount of diverse types of vegetables, those people are actually going to have lower risks of cancers because they're consuming a more nutrient rich profile of foods. So it's not necessarily about red meat. Yes, if all of my diet is red meat, if I wake up and I eat a steak and I eat a steak for
Carnivore.
lunch, and
Carnivore diet.
yeah, if I just carnivore diet it, this is what I'm describing, and I eat a steak for dinner,
Hmm.
yes, I'm going to have poor health outcomes when it comes to like my heart health, not even
Yeah.
just cancer, cardiovascular disease. And so that's a pretty good output in some of these articles as well, is this
Yeah.
relative risk to cardiovascular diseases,
Yeah.
and even diabetes. But again, it's really hard to generate numbers on these. But diets that have high amounts of fruits and vegetables alongside red meats, particularly leaner cuts of red meats, or even lean meats in general, are going to have more favorable outcomes when it comes to human health. Not even just through cancer.
Yeah, I love
That's
that.
it.
That's it. If
And
you
that's it.
off
Podcast over. See you guys next time.
another plug for more fruits and veggies,
Yeah,
people. Honestly, there's not enough plugs in the world, but it's yet another reason it can offset any potential risk for cancer that you're getting from red meat, which is something
yeah,
I've always heard too, and I was eager to hear your thoughts on that. So I'm glad to hear that that's like confirmed stamp of approval from
sure.
Cancer Daddy.
Actually, Cancer Daddy. Yeah, I have a question for you, actually, based on this though too. Where do
Sure.
you think that this? Why are people so continuously confused about this kind of stuff? Because it just seems like no matter how much evidence we have out there for the importance of consuming this diverse diet in relation to human physiology, it just seems like people get so easily wrapped up in these um, diet cults,
Yeah.
for lack of a better word. What do you think drives that?
I think that's a conversation of human behavior, really. Like, why are we attracted to extremist messages or things that are, what's the word I'm looking for? Just fantastic and out of this world and new and noteworthy. Like, why are we so interested in those things? And um, I think this is something that Dr. Andrea Love talks about a lot. I don't know if you know who that is, but
I know who Andrea is. Yeah,
she's great.
She's not a fan of me, but I like her a lot.
She's been on my pod a couple times, and she is going
Yeah,
to be
she's
again.
awesome.
She is,
Good.
and
Tell her I
something
said hi.
I will. I'll let her know. Something that
Tell
she
her to
says.
unblock me.
Oh no.
Anyways,
Something that she says a lot is that we just have so much. Well, there's a huge obsession with health and trying to be in control of it, and I think when people are given information that sounds like a new way to take control of their health, all logic seems to go out the window in terms of what they've been told before. And I also think it's a literacy issue. And I don't blame people for this because not everybody is a PhD or a dietitian. Like, I
sure,
think it's just
of
like
course,
people are easily swayed by information about nutrition because they don't necessarily have like the baseline knowledge of why something like fruits and veggies can offset the cancer risk of red meat or whatever it is. Like, there's just a gap there in knowledge and literacy and statistical literacy too. And so I think it's a combination of all those things and people wanting to be in control and people being attracted to new things that
yeah,
everybody swears by. And especially when you have people that are an authority figure in some way, whether they're a doctor of psychiatry and talking about nutrition or whatever it is.
yeah. No names there, huh?
Yeah. I think that also easily sways people because, white coat syndrome, they think that they must know if they have an MD behind their name and or have a PhD in something. And I think it's important to remind people, so I will right now, that a PhD is a specialist in a very specific thing, which is why I
Mhm.
have Cancer Daddy on the podcast right now to talk about cancer, because that's what his PhD is in, it's cancer biology.
Right. But as you point out, relating there is like it's important for people to know, and I can't stress this enough on any podcast that I've been on. People need to be comfortable with the fact that I will often say I don't know when I
Yeah.
don't know something,
Yeah.
and not be thrown off by that, because I can't. I know a lot about cancer, but I also don't know everything about cancer at the same
Right.
time,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there are specific cancers that I've studied. I have to dedicate a lot of time to studying those specific cancers. I can't realistically be expected to know everything about all of them.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And I think the deeper
I
you
mean,
get into a field, the more you realize you don't know. It's like,
yeah, and
oh,
you also
wow.
realize how much more entrenched in a niche you become.
Yeah.
So even regarding my own career, I've had to take a step back, because on my academic track of research, I found that I was going down this rabbit hole of just getting entrenched in studying the same cancer types and the same mechanisms forever, which is nowadays kind of what is necessary to become a professor.
Hmm.
If you don't do that, you're kind of taking the hard way into academia.
Yeah.
And so I've taken, especially since I've transitioned out of academic work more into biotech, I've taken more of this holistic approach to cancer, where now I'm trying to focus on, what are the important physiological factors in treating a diverse type of cancers, as opposed to just hyperfixating on the mechanisms that I can find across a bunch of different types of cancers. Because still at that level, it's still one mechanism across a bunch of cancers, but you're not considering all of the things that make the different cancers different to treat,
Sure.
different physiological implications, and different in their advancement, different in their staging as the cancers develop.
Yeah.
So I've found that I've gained a better education stepping out of academia, because I'm forced to learn more about the clinical aspects of a bunch of different types of cancers, and not just a fixation on one type of cancer or one mechanism within a bunch of types of cancers.
Yeah. 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 So it's tough because there is people love to think they know everything.
Mhm.
Again,
Yeah.
human behavior. I think that's just like we're all selfish in some way and think very highly of ourselves.
Yeah.
And when you do go through an academic track or you go through the ringer of having people tell you that you're
And
wrong
it is a
about things,
ringer.
then you realize, like, oh, wow, I am an idiot in a lot of ways. And at the same time, that is something that I can improve on in a specific way. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be all knowing in all things, because
Yeah.
there is no way that you can be all knowing in all things. And that's the biggest danger with people on the internet, really, is the confidence that they exude over knowing something that they actually have no idea what they're talking about. And it's also that, like, I can't remember what this is called, but
Dunning-Kruger effect.
possibly I'm about to explain it and then you let me know if that's what it is. The difficulty it takes to disprove something is immensely more than, or I guess the effort, I should say, the effort it takes to like disprove a claim is immensely more than the effort it takes to just say something. Like I can just say something right now and it would take zero effort at all. But for you to then correct me, you have to sort through all of these things in your brain, pull out the filing cabinets from all this different stuff, perhaps bring up some studies, explain stuff to me. That takes you way more effort than it would take me to just give you something to dispel in the first place. So I think that's another big problem too, is that people have an unearned confidence by just saying stuff that sometimes is not being refuted because it just simply takes a lot of time to do it. Like I know for
Yeah.
myself, there's a lot of things that I could make videos about, but I don't, because I don't have the time
Yeah.
and I just don't want to.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's tough too, because like there's no video I hate making worse than debunking
Oh,
videos.
I
And
know.
it's like everybody wants them though. And that's the thing, is like they're entertaining. You want to be entertained, go to a fucking circus. Go watch some clowns. I'm not here to be your fucking monkey on a string. It's so frustrating to me, and I'm sorry to go off on a tangent
It's
here though too,
fine.
because it's like the debunking videos, they're counterproductive to education.
Mm.
And it's one thing to find a video of somebody who thinks they know something
Mm-hmm.
on the internet, who clearly doesn't know what they're talking about, and then show them in the background of a video and being like, this person's an idiot, let me tell you why this person's an idiot. And it's like, obviously they're an idiot. You sent me this video to talk about how much of an idiot they were.
Mm-hmm.
So you're left in this like self-fulfilling prophecy of people just calling each other idiots online with kind of no clear resolution.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to place myself on a pedestal, but like it's not fun making that content for me. I'd
Yeah.
rather be more productive in the way that I go about these things. And as you said, it's also significantly more challenging to find evidence to refute those statements, because either there isn't any,
Mm-hmm.
or I have to go through extreme measures. Oh, my cat's here. I have to go through
Yay.
extreme measures. Oh, he ran away. I have to go through extreme measures to try and explain some biological principle
Yeah.
about why it's false.
Yeah.
Whereas I could just continue educating the way that I normally do, and people get more out of that.
Yeah.
So that's why, you know, I typically stray away from the debunking stuff, and it's unnerving and it's frustrating to me that people would rather that than me discuss the really interesting new paper that came out that, discusses how cancer cells shift their metabolism in a variety of different ways to use some specific type of nucleic acid, or how a ketogenic diet is doing in a clinical trial,
Hmm.
or how the implementation of artificial intelligence is being used to detect skin cancer. It's awesome. I'd love to talk about those. Then, do the Dr. Id's approach of just
Yeah.
shitting on somebody on TikTok,
Which,
or
I mean, bless him.
and it's
He's doing
fine.
a
There's
different
comedic
kind of the
value.
Lord's work there. Like that is
Absolutely.
important still, because I think that it does end up being educational if it's done well, and I think
Yeah.
like in the case of IDS, there's always good evidence that he's discussing, and I think that can be pretty valuable. But I also think that it's rage bait at the end of the day. That's why
Yeah.
those type of videos do really well. And if you ask
Yeah.
people who make those type of videos, they'll agree, like,
I
yeah,
would love
they do
to
well.
I would love to speak to IDS about this too, is because, like, you can't tell me that he's not frustrated with doing this shit over and over and over
Oh, I
again.
think he does.
Because
He's
the
a
amount
friend
of
of mine. Yeah, I think he gets
yeah,
tired.
the
Yeah.
amount of effort that he goes through to find the research to try and break it down on top of this stuff is like, it's depressingly too much. I wish we
Yeah.
could just get into the things that he's interested in without having to consistently do that stuff all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. He'll every now and then he'll mention in a comment like, I spent 4 hours on this video for you, and this is your response.
Right.
It's like, oh, hi Kitty. Which one is this?
This is Apollo.
Okay, anybody that's not watching this on YouTube, go watch this on YouTube so you can meet Apollo, the sweetest little ginger cat. Oh my goodness.
He likes to dance. Yeah. This should just be the reel that you promote this video with.
Absolutely.
I can plop some music in this.
Yes. Oh, he is cute. I really want an orange tabby. I want an orange tabby, and I want to name it Bowser.
That's a good name.
Apollo's a good
They're
name
good
too.
cats. Yeah. His brother is Hermes. They're bros.
Nice. I love that. So, last thing to wrap up, let's just touch on the aspartame conversation.
Sure.
So, my understanding of this is that it would require a ginormous amount of aspartame to cause any potential harm. And before you would even have an increase in cancer risk, you would have an increase of other problems. But I want to hear from you about that. Can you confirm / deny? And also, I think I've heard some conversations about like the grading of this, like a grade B or something. I don't really know how that works. So I'd love for you to kind of walk through that.
The International Association for Research on Cancer
Sure.
has a grading in terms of their association to risk.
Beautiful. Yes.
So that's probably what you're talking about.
Yep.
And I've spoken to Apollo at length about the implications of aspartame on cancer risk. And although he recognizes the importance of the International Association of Research on Cancer and their designation of aspartame, as you point out, the abundance of aspartame needed to, put somebody at risk for specific types of cancers. And again, Apollo's in agreement, right, buddy? The amount of aspartame that somebody needs to consume is just way too much, such that they would need to drink like hundreds and hundreds of cans of Coke per day.
Yeah.
That they would have other issues.
Gastrointestinal issues like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yes, there again, this goes back to the same sort of discussion about tattoos and cancer. Mm-hmm. That just because there is some risk associated with this doesn't mean that risk for everybody is going to be the same.
Yeah.
You can certainly avoid something like aspartame. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But I find that drinks that have aspartame in it are useful tools, especially because useful nutritional tools, because they're typically 0 calorie. Yeah. So if I want a 0 calorie sweetened beverage that has aspartame in it, I have a Coke Zero or something that has sucralose or aspartame in it every once in a while, maybe one a day. I'm going to be fine. But it's, if that alongside other poor dietary choices, those sorts of things are going to increase my risks for diseases like cancers. It's not just the aspartame thing. And it's, a lot of people like to fixate on risk associated with a single ingredient in food like aspartame or sucralose. But again, if we realize that our diet is so much more than the protein we eat, so much more than the aspartame that we're consuming, I think people will have better health outcomes in the end once
Yeah.
they start to consider food is so much more than a single nutrient.
Do you think that there's the same kind of offset of risk if somebody has a diet that's diverse in fruits and veggies and all kinds of things and they consume aspartame? Or is there not really a
What do
establishment
you
of
mean
that?
there?
Well, like it is with red meat, like fruits and veggies can kind of offset potential harm. Do you think that's true
I
with
honestly,
aspartame?
I don't know if it'll offset any risks of aspartame, but I wager in people that are consuming a diverse diet, you wouldn't even be able to see the risk of aspartame
Mm-hmm.
on disease just because they're likely not to be over consuming it anyway, that it would be
Yeah.
deleterious to their health.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious about that. Well, there you go. Another plug for a diverse diet.
Yeah,
That's what we
God
do here.
forbid. And Apollo, again, we feed him a diverse diet and just
Yeah.
look how healthy he
I know.
is.
He's so healthy. He's so
He's
beautiful.
just so healthy,
He's so majestic. I can
He
tell
is.
that he is just living the best life.
Yep.
He's so
He actually
cute.
wants to eat more, and he's only here right now because it is International Begging Hour.
Yeah, he's ready.
Otherwise, he doesn't care about me.
Apollo, do you have any thoughts for the pod?
Any thoughts, buddy? He doesn't care about humanity either way. I think that's what that's his overall statement.
He only cares about you as a slave to feed him.
Barely. Yeah.
Well, any other thoughts today that you would like to leave with the audience? Joe, not Apollo.
Yeah. I think honestly that people just need to be a little bit more critical about the way that they think about things in general.
Mm-hmm.
And while things are fancy from a scientific perspective, and I absolutely love to talk about the fancy mechanistic stuff,
Mm-hmm.
there's only some relative realism associated with the things that I like to discuss that are going to be associated with a person's health outcomes. That it's important that we not extrapolate the things that I discuss or that a lot of other scientific communicators discuss so far, such that they're not real anymore.
Yeah.
And I do my best to try and be transparent about that kind of stuff because I always try and tie my videos in at the end to say just how likely something is. But yeah, just a little bit more critical thinking
Go a long way.
than what we're normally used to. Yeah.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, tell the audience where they can find you to learn more from you.
Sure. So I recently just made a website. You can follow me at drjoezundell.com. You can also follow me on my Instagram, which is at dr.joezundell. Threads. I'm trying to become more active on YouTube, so you can YouTube Dr. Joe Zundell or Joseph Zundell. My page will pop up. I have a video actually coming this week about this myth that we all have cancer cells within us, which I think stems from a relatively poor understanding of cell biology. So I'll discuss in that video, which is 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I think is manageable for most people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so follow me on YouTube, Instagram, go to my website. I have a newsletter, sign up on my website, check my link tree for other affiliations on my Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
The newsletter link is also there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation, and I'm excited to hear what people think about it. So if you loved this episode, please let us know by leaving a rating or a review would be lovely. And share it with a friend who may be interested in this topic as well. And I'll put all of Joe's links in the show notes so that you can go follow him and learn more from him. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. I appreciate it.